They say the West was built on gunpowder and grit. But sometimes it's the stories whispered between bullets, that in a dusty town where the law wears two faces, a stranger arrived bleeding, running, and carrying secrets, buried deeper than any grave. This is the story of Jack Rayner, a man who gave up fighting, and Clara Vaughn, a woman who had no choice but to keep going. The woman who stayed. Settle in. The wind had died by sundown, leaving the prairie around Grady's Fork still as glass. Jack Rayner stood beside the half-built stable sleeves, rolled sweat clinging to his collarbone. His hammer hung loosely from his calloused fingers, the last nail for the evening still resting between his lips. Then he heard it. A horse, just one, moving fast but uneven. The rhythm of hooves stumbled in the dirt, like a drunk man's boots. Jack turned his head toward the road that sloped in from the east. The sky above was turning violet, and the pine trees cast long crooked shadows across the ground. Then she came. A blur of dust and tangled red hair, the woman slumped forward in the saddle, her clothes torn, one arm hanging stiffly to the side. The horse slowed to a lurch, and as it reached the edge of the barnyard, she slid off and collapsed onto the dirt. Jack didn't move. She raised her head just enough to meet his eyes. Blood streaked her sleeve. One cheek was bruised a deep greenish purple beneath her freckles. "Don't let them find me," she whispered, voice hoarse, cracked from the wind. "I'll sleep in your barn if you let me breathe till morning." Jack's hand inched instinctively toward the old Colt Navy revolver, buried beneath a pile of scrap iron inside the forge. But he didn't draw it. Not yet. There was no one chasing her. Not that he could see. No torchlight, no ducks, no angry men shouting into the dusk. Just this half-dead woman, and the heavy silence pressing in, all around them. Still, something was wrong. His gut knew it before his mind could form a thought. He stepped forward slowly, boots crunching the gravel. "You hurt bad." "No," she murmured. "Not where it matters." Her eyes didn't plead. They calculated, measured him. Jack had seen eyes like that before on men, just before the draw. "Name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Clara Vaughn." It wasn't familiar, but something about the way she said it told him it wasn't quite the truth either, not a full one anyway. He exhaled through his nose. "Barn's in the back, hay's dry. You got one night. Don't make me regret it." Clara nodded once, and before he could say more, she pushed herself upright with surprising control for someone who'd just fallen half-conscious. As she staggered into the barn, Jack caught the flash of something silver at her throat, a small oval locket engraved and delicate, wholly out of place with her torn coat. She didn't ask for help. She didn't thank him. And she didn't cry. Jack watched her vanish into the dark, then turned and headed back to the forge, muttering a curse under his breath. Later that night, he couldn't sleep. The fire in the hearth had long since died down, but Jack sat near it anyway, cleaning his tools by lantern light. Outside, the coyotes howled. In the distance, something rustled past the corral fence. Jack froze. The horses were shifting uneasily in the barn. He stood, reached beneath a false panel in the floor, and pulled out the Colt Navy. The metal was cool and familiar in his grip. Stepping out onto the porch, he saw it. Just beyond the barn, a flicker of lantern light. Then gone. Someone had been there, watching. He walked toward the spot, slow and deliberate, but found nothing. No boot prints, no broken brush. Just shadows. He didn't like this, not one bit. Back inside, he slid the revolver into the hollowed-out tool crate near the forge. Clara hadn't stirred since she'd gone in, at least not that he could hear. Still, the air felt like it held its breath. By dawn, the clouds over the ridge glowed pale pink. Jack poured 2 cups of coffee, black and bitter, then walked out to the barn. The big doors creaked on their hinges. Hay dust floated in shafts of early sunlight. Clara was standing. Wrapped in a wool blanket, hair tousled from sleep, she held the Colt Navy revolver loosely in one hand, his revolver. Jack froze. She didn't raise it. But she didn't lower it either. You think you saved me, she said quietly. But you might have just made yourself a target. Jack didn't speak. His eyes flicked to the gun, then back to her. Clara looked exhausted but focused, like someone who'd slept with one eye open their entire life. Her voice held no fear, just resignation, as if she'd said the same words to different men before. Where'd you find that? He asked finally. She nodded toward the tool crate behind the forge. You're good at hiding things. Just not good enough. Jack exhaled through his nose and stepped forward. She let him take the gun from her hand. No harm meant, she said. Just habit. He studied her face, her posture, the tension that never quite left her shoulders. Her blouse was torn at the seam, and beneath the edge, a faint red welt bloomed down her collarbone. Not fresh, not accidental. I heard talk in town, Jack said slowly. Pinkerton men came through 2 days back. Didn't say what for. Folks figure someone's running from something. Real serious. Clara didn't blink. Pinkertons chase a lot of people. Not all of them guilty. Jack waited for more, but she just walked past him, dragging the blanket tighter around her. Something fluttered to the ground where she'd been sleeping. A crumpled yellowed paper, creased and soft from too many hands. Jack bent to pick it up, but Clara turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. I'll take that, she said, reaching out. He handed it over without comment. She tucked it inside her coat without unfolding it. Jack didn't press. He'd learned a long time ago, if a person doesn't want to tell you what they're carrying, there's usually a damn good reason. He stood at the barn door watching as Clara walked toward the pump, rinsing blood from her hands in the morning chill. The horses behind her snorted softly. She looked up at him once, then turned away, silent. The sun rose slow over Grady's Fork, but something in the air told Jack that whatever storm she was running from, it hadn't passed yet. And somehow it was coming his way now. Old stories still live on in the telling. If you believe that too, then hit subscribe. So next time the wind whispers through Grady's Fork, you'll be the first to hear it. The morning light spilled soft through the cracks in the wooden barn wall, catching dust motes in slow motion as they drifted through the air. Jack pushed the door open with a creak, a tin mug of black coffee in one hand. The hay still smelled faintly of smoke from last night's near miss. A barn fire that hadn't quite caught, but left behind the unmistakable scent of warning. But Clara was gone. His eyes scanned the barn, no sign of the woman who'd arrived bloodied and desperate just hours before. But something on the workbench caught his eye. A folded piece of paper and a rough sketch of Windmere Street. A red X marked the town bank. 2 other symbols, courthouse and stage stop, were underlined. He stared at it for a moment, feeling the tight coil of uncertainty return to his chest. He found her 20 minutes later, perched on the fence post behind the forge, sipping his coffee like it belonged to her. You always let strange women steal your breakfast, she asked, lifting the mug. Jack didn't smile. Only the ones who bleed on my barn floor. She held his gaze a moment longer before nodding toward the horizon. I'll leave soon. But you should know something first. And so she began to tell him, not everything, but enough to knot the tension in his shoulders tighter. He died. I ran. That's the short version, she said. The long version, I'm not ready to say. She looked tired. Not in the way of someone who lacked sleep, but someone who had carried too much for too long. Who was he? Jack asked. Lawrence Keene, a shipping magnate, big name in Chicago. Bigger temper behind closed doors. And the law thinks you did it. She shrugged. The law isn't fond of women who disappear when their rich fiancés die mysteriously. Jack's eyes drifted to the silver locket at her neck. It caught the morning sun, and for a moment, he thought it might burn. The initials, he said quietly. L. Vaughn, P.A. She looked down at it, fingers brushing the metal. Her fingers brushed the locket again, the way someone might touch a wound to make sure it still hurt. It was my father's Pinkerton agent, one of the first. He died when I was 16. Some say he went rogue. I think he got too close to something. Jack didn't respond. But deep down, something about her story struck too close to old memories of a grave with no justice and a name he still dreamed of at night. Clara stood brushing off her skirt. "I'll be gone by noon." He didn't answer. By midday, the forge was already humming with heat, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling of something unfinished lingering in the barn. That afternoon, town began to buzz. Jack headed into Grady's Fork for supplies, keeping his head down. At the mercantile, Mrs. Brecker, the town's self-declared oracle of gossip, pulled him aside. "You've had company, haven't you?" she whispered, smile too wide. Jack's jaw tightened. "Someone passing through. Pretty thing, too. Bit bruised up. Doesn't talk much. I saw her slip out the back of your place yesterday morning. Town's got eyes, Jack Rayner, even if yours are still shut." He didn't dignify it with a response. Outside, the sheriff's young deputy, Miles Crow, leaned casually against the post near the general store. With his crisp shirt and charming grin, he looked more saloon singer than lawman. He tipped his hat when Jack passed. "Heard about a stranger in town," Crow said, voice too smooth. "Heard a lot of things lately," Jack replied. "Doesn't mean they're true." Crow smiled. "Still, if you see anyone unusual, let us know." Jack didn't stop walking. Later that evening, Clara wandered into the forge while he was working the anvil. She moved like she didn't want to be noticed, but also like she expected to be. "That deputy watched me all afternoon," she said, sitting on a barrel. "He's not the only one." She chuckled softly. "Mrs. Brecker gave me a look like I stole her wedding china, so I might have kicked a bucket into her shins on accident." Jack finally looked up. "You didn't." "I might have." The door creaked open behind them. Mrs. Brecker stood there, too dressed up for the dust and too polite for sincerity. "Jack," she said sweetly, holding a small bottle. "Brought by some of my elderberry tonic, for the cough you pretend not to have." He nodded slowly, stepping forward. "That's mighty kind of you." Her eyes flicked past him to Clara. "I also came to ask if you've seen anyone new around. Town's a bit tense since the Pinkertons showed their faces." Jack forced a smile. "Haven't seen a soul worth reporting." Brecker turned to go, but not before glancing once more at Clara. When the door shut, Jack let out a breath. Then he noticed the map was gone. Clara had vanished. Out back, only the sound of the breeze and a loose shutter remained. On the forge table next to the water trough, she'd left the Windmere map and 3 places marked courthouse, stage stop, and the bank. Jack stared at it, heart thudding. Ever since them Pinkerton men rode through town, quiet and tight-lipped, Jack had known trouble was coming. He just didn't expect it to wear a bloody dress and a silver locket. The wind that swept through Grady's Fork that night carried the smell of pine smoke and something darker beneath it, a whisper of danger that made the animals restless and the air feel thick. Jack sat on his porch rifle across his lap, waiting. Clara returned just before midnight. She was mud-streaked and silent, but her eyes were sharp, like someone who'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "I need your help," she said without preamble, "and not just for hiding." Jack didn't speak. He only opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, she laid down a soot-stained envelope. The wax seal of the Pinkerton agency had melted at the edges, but the crest remained barely. "My father, L. Vaughn. He wasn't just investigating missing women. He was onto something bigger. Corruption. Railroads, judges, sheriffs. The kind of men who think owning land means owning people." She unrolled a packet of documents, frayed and brittle. "I had the full file. Smuggled it out when Lawrence died. I thought they burned everything in the Chicago fire, but some pages survived: names, schedules, payoffs. Jack leaned in, scanning the smudged ink. His fingers stopped on a line. Judge Merritt, quarterly payments. Via Blackwell, enforcement M. Crow. His jaw tightened. Crow, he muttered. Clara's voice lowered. You know him better than I do. The kind who'd kill to stay clean? Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next morning, while Clara rested in the hayloft, Jack returned to the barn. He wasn't thinking about conspiracies or corruption, just shoeing a stubborn horse with a cracked hoof. But as he reached for a rusted horseshoe under the workbench, his fingers brushed something unexpected, cool leather smooth, despite the dust. He pulled it out, a leather-bound notebook, the corners worn, the spine cracking like old bones. On the inner cover, faint but unmistakable, was the Pinkerton seal. He opened it. At first just faded scrawl, then dates, locations, names, reports, dozens of them. Signed L. Vaughn. Jack sank onto a stool, the book trembling slightly in his hands. Each page read like a grave dug in daylight. Bribes, threats, disappearances staged to protect the East-West Railway expansion. Familiar names. Some still alive, some long buried. Others, like Merritt, Blackwell, Crow, still walking free. He thought of Clara's father, of fire and ash, and how things meant to be destroyed sometimes chose to survive. When he handed the notebook to Clara later that evening, she looked as if she'd seen a ghost. This was supposed to be gone. I hid it in Lawrence's office the night he died. I watched them burn the rest. Jack closed the book slowly. Well, they missed one. That night, they worked in the barn, the scent of wax and hay, thick in the air. Candlelight threw long shadows over the floorboards. Clara translated her father's shorthand lips, moving silently as her finger traced each line. Jack mapped timelines on a torn feed sack, drawing lines between towns' rail junctions' names. For a while they worked in silence. Then Clara paused, staring at the flame between them. You ever think we're just pieces in something too big to win? Jack didn't look up. All the time. And still you help me. He paused. I buried one innocent woman once. I won't do it again. She nodded. Later, as the candle flickered low, she told him about the first time her father taught her how to read a map, not for direction, but for truth. You don't look for roads, she whispered. You look for what's missing between them. Jack didn't say anything. But when she brushed a hand against his shoulder before turning away, he didn't move either. Some silences didn't need filling. 3 days later, Deputy Crow showed up at the forge with a bottle and a smile. Thought you might want something stronger than that black tar you call coffee, he said, setting the bourbon down with too much cheer. Jack didn't touch it. Crow leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You've had some unusual company lately. Town's always talking. Doesn't make it true, Jack replied. Crow chuckled low and easy. Yeah, but see, when the talking stops, that's when trouble starts. He stepped closer. Some people don't take kindly to secrets, especially when those secrets come with guns, maps, and Pinkerton stamps. Jack's eyes stayed steady. You threatening me, Files? Just saying. Ghosts don't stay buried forever. And neither do reputations. Crow tipped his hat and left, but the air hung heavier than before. That night, Mrs. Brecker arrived in a panic. He was in my shop, she hissed. Said if I didn't stop poking around, I'd end up like Clara's daddy. Jack, he meant it. Jack slammed the forge door behind her. His hands trembled as he turned to Clara. We move the files, tonight. But they were already too late. The fire began after midnight. At first it was just the scent smoke, bitter and sharp, curling beneath the door. Then the heat. The crack of timber outside. Clara woke Jack with a shove. The barn. They bolted from the house. The flames leapt into the sky like demons set loose. Horses screamed, wild-eyed, kicking at their stalls. Jack ran to the well, hauling buckets in frantic succession. Clara dashed to the barn doors, trying to unbolt the last pen. The smoke clawed at their lungs and the heat scorched their face. Through the roar, a voice rang out, "Give us the girl, or we take the whole damn town." Jack spun toward the voice, but saw only a silhouette retreating into the firelight. Together they saved what they could: 2 horses, 1 fire-damp satchel of papers. The rest was gone. Ash rained down like snow. By dawn the barn was nothing but char and ruin. Townsfolk stood at a distance, murmuring in clumps, some crossing themselves, others just watching. Clara sat by the trough, rinsing blood from Jack's hand. A shard of glass had torn across his palm. She didn't speak, just worked jaw tight, breath shallow. "I remembered something," she said finally, her voice low. "The night Lawrence died, he argued with someone, Judge Merritt's bodyguard. Something about a vault. I think the real killer wasn't who I thought." Jack's gaze didn't leave her face. "And now they know you know." She nodded slowly. "Then we finish what my father started. Or we burn with it." Jack touched the edge of the satchel. "Either way, we don't run anymore." Behind them, the barn collapsed in on itself with a hiss and groan. From the ashes, Jack pulled out a half-burned slip of paper. Scrawled in soot-dark ink was one final threat: "She's next." The morning after the fire, the ashes still smoldered. Jack stood at the edge of what had once been his barn, the charred remains of rafters jutting into the sky. Like blackened ribs, the air smelled of ruin and something older, grief that had no name. Inside the house, Clara sifted through what little they'd saved. Her hands moved with purpose, but her eyes were distant. The girl who had once stumbled into his life, bleeding and breathless, was gone. In her place stood someone colder, sharper. And Jack knew what he had to do. He opened the trunk beneath his bed. It groaned with age, and inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay the rifle he hadn't touched in 5 years. A Sharps 50 custom trigger. The kind of weapon you didn't carry unless you meant to use it. Clara saw him on the porch later, cleaning the stock. "That yours?" she asked. Was he set? "Is again." She stared a moment. "You look different with it." He didn't smile. "I am." They found Old Man Reeve that evening, sitting on his porch with a rifle across his knees and a flask half empty. He squinted at Clara. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "You knew my father," she said. Reeve nodded slowly. "Lem Vaughn. Best damn Pinkerton I ever met. Smart, too smart. Wouldn't take a bribe. Wouldn't look away." "They killed him for that," Clara said. "No doubt," Reeve said. "He came to Grady's Fork a decade ago, trying to hide you after a job went bad in Kansas." "You were what, 19? Clara blinked. 10. Reeve frowned. "Right. Damn memory." He sighed. "He left something with me. I kept it all these years, figured I'd never need it." From a hidden compartment beneath his floorboards, Reeve pulled a thin tin box. Inside were 3 letters sealed, one addressed to Clara. She read it silently, tears burning, but unshed. Jack stood behind her, silent as stone. By the end of the week, the town was buzzing. Clara, against Jack's warnings, stood up at the weekly gathering in front of the general store. She held the Pinkerton files in her hand like a preacher with the Bible. "This town's being bought piece by piece," she said. "Judge Merritt, Sheriff Blackwell, Deputy Crow. My father died proving it. And now they want to silence me too." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked away. Others nodded grimly. Mrs. Gable from the bakery stepped forward. "I remember Lem Vaughn. Always bought rye. Never let kids go hungry." A rancher named Eli muttered, "Crow tried to buy my land last year. Cheap. Said the law would turn on me if I didn't." But not everyone was swayed. You expect us to believe a woman on the run, someone scoffed. Clara stared him down. Believe what you want. But read the names. She passed the first pages around. Slowly, heads bowed. Later, Jack found her behind the saloon, hands shaking. You did good, he said. She didn't look at him. It won't matter if no one acts. They will. She turned. How can you be sure? He looked away. Because if they don't, I will. That night, the sky bruised purple with storm clouds. Clara was late returning to the forge. Jack paced the porch like a caged dog. Then he heard Ida scream. They found Mrs. Brecker behind her shop body, twisted dress torn. A silver locket dangled from her hand, nearly identical to Clara's, except this one was broken clean in half. Pinned to her chest was a note, Only one Vaughn gets out. Jack stood in silence, wind cutting across his face. Clara stared at the locket, horror creeping in. They thought she was me, she whispered. Jack reached for her shoulder. Or they want you to think that. She didn't move, just stared at the broken charm. Later, under the flicker of lantern light, Jack cleaned his rifle. Clara watched him, then whispered, You ever think maybe it's too late? He looked up. I buried one innocent woman once. I won't do it again. Outside, thunder rolled, and the war for Grady's Fork had begun. Dawn broke blood red over Grady's Fork. A low fog clung to the ground like breath held too long, curling around the boots of silent buildings and lampposts still flickering from the night. Windows remained shuttered, doors bolted tight. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. The kind of morning where something old stirred in the soil, as if the town itself was holding its breath for what was coming. The town square, usually so quiet at this hour, pulsed with tension. Jack stood behind a horse cart overturned for cover, breath steady, despite the pain searing through his ribs. Clara crouched beside him, revolver clutched in white-knuckled hands. Old man Reeve, kneeling behind a barrel stack, chambered his rifle like it was 1879 all over again. Across the square, Judge Merritt's hired guns spread out in formation. Deputy Crow stood in the center, face bruised but burning with fury. Give up the girl, Jack, he shouted. She ain't worth dying for. Jack didn't answer. He simply stood up and fired. The first shot cracked like lightning. Then the town exploded in gunfire. Reeve dropped 2 men before they even reached the well. Clara fired from behind the car, teeth clenched, her aim true. Jack moved with precision, honed from a life he thought he'd buried, calm, ruthless, protective. Crow rushed forward, a wild cry tearing from his throat, eyes burning with desperation and something darker, betrayal perhaps. His boots pounded against the cobblestones, gun raised high, jaw clenched like a man with nothing left to lose. For a heartbeat, it felt as if time slowed. The dust lifted in the sunlight, the sharp ring of gunfire faded, and Jack turned just in time to meet Crow's gaze. A flash of recognition, a flicker of regret. But Reeve's shot rang out, breaking the moment like glass. The bullet caught Crow square in the chest, spinning him mid-stride, before he crumpled lifeless into the dirt. Clara shouted, Jack, but it was Reeve who fired first. Crow stumbled, dropped to his knees, and fell face first into the dirt. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunpowder in the air. Jack collapsed. Blood soaked through his shirt. The night after the shootout was quiet. Clara sat at Jack's bedside, the forge dimly lit around them. Reeve had stitched the wound as best he could, but Jack hadn't stirred in hours. Clara washed the blood from her hands slowly, methodically, as if scrubbing it from her soul. You helped me survive, she whispered, voice cracking. Now I'm staying to live. She reached for his hand. It twitched faintly. His eyes opened. Took you long enough, he rasped. She laughed, choked by relief. Stubborn bastard, she muttered. 6 months later, Grady's Fork was quieter. Different, but not broken. The saloon no longer hosted loud midnight poker games, but instead closed by 9. Children played freely again near the square, their laughter echoing down streets that once reeked of tension. Folks nodded at Clara when she passed some hesitant, others warm. A few still crossed to the other side of the street, but most had come to accept her presence like morning frost or church bells. When she opened her bookshop, Mrs. Gable brought pieces. Eli the rancher donated a shelf. Even Reverend Cole, once tight-lipped about sin, had purchased a book on natural philosophy and left with a smile. The scars were still there, yes, but so was the healing. Clara had turned the old mercantile next to the forge into a bookshop. She called it Vaughn and Calmer's Books and Curiosities. Few people asked about the back room. If they had, they'd have found shelves of files all meticulously labeled Vaughn Pinkerton Grady Rail Expansion and more. Jack returned to the forge slower than before but steady. The limp in his gait didn't bother him. Not anymore. People talked. They always did. But none dared challenge them now. Not after what happened. Some said Clara was dangerous. Others said she was the reason Grady's Fork hadn't been sold off to the railroad barons. Both were right. One warm afternoon, Jack was hammering out a horseshoe in the new barn when Clara leaned on the doorway, arms folded. He didn't look up. "That first night," she said, "when I asked to sleep here, it wasn't just for safety." Jack kept hammering the rhythm steady. "I know," he said. "That's why I never let you leave." She crossed the barn, slowly reached for his hand, smudged with ash and iron. "What do we do now?" she asked. He looked at her then, eyes tired but clear. "Now we live." 2 weeks after the shootout, a new Pinkerton arrived. He rode in alone, his black coat pressed and his yetch gleaming like judgment in the midday sun. The townsfolk watched from behind curtains, murmuring about lawmen who arrived too late and justice long overdue. But this one wasn't here for theatrics. He came with record signatures and a quiet urgency that spoke of unfinished business. Clara met him on the porch, Jack beside her, both silent, as the agent unrolled the warrant signed in Washington. This wasn't revenge. It was the final step in something greater. A reckoning by the book, not the barrel. The files Jack handed over weren't bloodied. They were organized, annotated, impossible to ignore. And when they led the judge away, it was in silence, not shame, not triumph. Just the long-awaited echo of justice finally spoken aloud. Jack watched with steady eyes, the grip on his cane tight but unshaking. In that moment, the years he spent running from the world, from himself, felt lighter somehow. Clara stood beside him, shoulders straight, chin high, not out of pride, but out of closure. Her father's name had been dragged through mud, hunted and forgotten. Now it stood tall again, spoken by lawmen and written in ledgers. She didn't cry. But when she exhaled, it sounded like the first breath of a new life. Young, clean-cut, holding a warrant, signed in Washington. Jack handed over the files. Not with a bullet, not with blood, but with a quiet resolve. "The law can have him," he said. "We've already done our part." Judge Merritt was arrested without a fight. Justice, not vengeance. It wasn't fast. It wasn't clean. But it was real. And sometimes that was enough. In the quiet hours when Grady's Fork slept and the stars hung low, Clara often sat in the back room of her shop, candlelight flickering over old reports. Not as a fugitive, not as a daughter seeking revenge, but as a woman who stayed and built something worth protecting. If this story stirred something in you, maybe a memory of an old Western, or a whisper of a time when justice rode dusty roads instead of polished courtrooms, then you are not alone. Jack Rayner may be fiction, but the kind of man who carries his guilt like a badge and still chooses to do right. He's real in spirit. And Clara Vaughn, smart, stubborn, steered, but unbreakable. She's every woman who's ever stood up when the world told her to sit down. Out there in forgotten corners of the West, maybe there once was a forge like Jack's, a bookshop like Clara's, a town like Grady's Fork, trying to decide who it wanted to be toy. And maybe, just maybe, there still are. If you enjoyed this tale and want more stories like it, gritty, heartfelt, rooted in the dust and dreams of the Old West, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Tell me, what would you have done if Clara showed up at your barn that night? Until next time, ride easy and remember, sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting back. It's choosing to stay.